In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Welcome back to my channel Nadir AR. In the last video, we had discussed that how we are going to choose a styling library and how we are going to evolve architecture for styling and theming of the application so that it is easy to rebrand the whole application whenever needed, right? Today we are going to work another feature that is related with UI components, which is called Storybook. This video was scheduled to be recorded yesterday. However, I got an interview scheduled because these days I am also exploring new opportunities as a React Native senior React Native engineer or as a React engineer, right? So if any of my viewers can refer me in any open position, then I am going to be grateful to you. Okay, coming back to the topic, our topic Storybook, that what is Storybook and why we need it, what are their benefits. Well, Storybook has multiple advantages. The number one advantage is that we can basically test our UI components in isolation without rendering the actual application, without rendering them on the screen, on the application, in the application, right? We can test them in isolation without going into the flow of our application, and it is beneficial for non-technical stakeholders, particularly product managers or investors. They can check the user interface and may provide their feedback at early stage, right? If you want to go into the further detail about that why we need the storybook, here the documentation has a great explanation here, that every piece of UI is now a component. Particularly in case of React and React Native, the superpower of components is that you do not need to spin up the whole app just to see how they render, right? You can render a specific variation. We can check, let's suppose we have made a reusable button component with multiple variations, then we can check each variation without changing the code. We can check them in the isolation. We will see in a while what does that mean. Just be midway, right? So this is the benefit, and Storybook also acts as a documentation as well. It is easy to understand. Usually I have observed while working in large products that the common components usually get messed up by multiple params, and for a new person who gets onboarded, it is difficult to differentiate that which param is going to make which difference. Storybook helps us to resolve this issue as well. The next step is that how we are going to set up and install it. There is very good documentation available about this guidance as well. As we had created our initial project with next.js, so I followed this documentation which is in the framework section on the storybook.js.org documentation. This is very important point. Just make sure before you go and install this Storybook that the next.js version is updated one. I got issues because I had older version of next.js in the project, then I updated it, right? And after that all worked fine. So in this way you are simply going to install the Storybook dependencies with this command. Once you are done with that, the next step is what is actually a story or how we write it, right? The next step is that how we are going to write a story. There are two parts in writing a story. Before we write a story, when you are going to install the dependencies, just like this, these all Storybook dependencies will be installed, right? Once you are done with that, you will see that .storybook folder has been created in your project. This folder is particularly related with the configuration of the Storybook in your project. If we open the main.ts, here you see instead of in front of stories, here we give the path that which files are basically are going to be identified as a stories files, right? They will basically end with the dot stories fix dot tsx or ts. In our case they are going to be tsx components. And then in the preview section, here you can in the documentation, basically, although I saw that we can give the theme, this theme is going to apply to our stories isolated components, right? However, this was not working. I had to specify this theme into the particular individual story instead of working here in the preview for all the stories. There is particularly a bug in this regard, right? You may explore that as well. So the next step comes that how we are going to write the stories. Let me basically follow this documentation. So where to put the stories? By default you are going to get a stories folder, but you may delete that, right? And follow this documentation that stories file should also lie along with that actual component, right, that is going to render into the app. So inside components button we have this same structure, feature based structure. Here the common button is we had basically made this component in our last video, reusable component, which is a wrapper over the chakra button widget. Here we have placed the stories .tsx file as well, which is going to act as a story of this button component. Okay, the next thing is component story format. It is going to be a particular standard, which is CSF, and this standard actually contains two things: that default exports. If I open my stories file, the first section is going to be a default export which describes the component itself for which we are going to write stories. So this meta section is going to describe that component. The title says component slash button, and component, this is going to refer to button. And then I was talking about this, that we have to provide a theme here in the decorators form. The second section is named export section, right, where we are actually going to define our stories. I defined two simple stories, one for the solid button, right, where I specify this children is going to be click me, and then the variant, the other is going to be by default in our button is solid, right. Then I defined another variant which is going to be outlined version of the button. You can get very good idea. Instead of memorizing all these steps, you need to follow the documentation. The first section is default exports. Metadata controls how Storybook lists your stories and provides information by used by add-ons. Add-ons are basically additional tools that enhance the functionality of Storybook. So then we have to define the stories which I already have shown you. These are going to be the argument being passed to our button component. So if we run in the package.json, you will see that some scripts have also been defined, particularly this yarn storybook is going to run our storybook in development mode. So here you saw there are, this is the solid button and this is the outline button. See, we are not making any change in the code, and we can see all the variants here. We do not have to change any parameters, right, which we were doing in the last video. And you can basically do this from here as well. You can check from here. This is particularly beneficial. Now I will repeat the benefits of Storybook again for the non-technical stakeholders particularly, and even for the technical, for the developers as well, especially new joining people. This Storybook makes a project scalable, right? If the shuffling in your team happens and new members join, they can easily go into the Storybook and check the certain variations of your reusable component. It is easy for them to integrate it into the new screens or make any changes, right? So I think we are done with the Storybook. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Go through its documentation, you will get more idea. Do practices, right? And let's meet in the next video. Thank you very much.